a seat, Jen. Welcome in, everybody. Wow, this is a turnout. You guys didn't have anything else to do on a Thursday night. It was just, you know, we could go have some champagne and party. I like it. This is a good crowd already. Okay. Well, we're going to pop open a party. We're going to pop open a few parties even. Liz is already working on one. It's going to be good. It's going to be okay. It's going to be safe.
It's not even moving, Sean. All right,
Okay.
you're up.
Make me nervous. The first with me. I tell you what, I'll teach you how to do it. You don't have to worry. We've got plenty of good stuff coming tonight. If this will just work, which is already exciting. I'm glad we're full, we're technical issues, everything is good all at once. Bam. All right, so we're going to talk about champagne versus sparkling wine. We're going to taste and evaluate a bunch of wines, which I know is why you're all here. And we're going to talk about some bubbly tips and tricks of all the fun that you can have with bubbles. We're going to taste the heck out of them, so look deeply into the eye of the bubbles, swirl them around, get them excited, sniff it, don't snort it, get the aroma out of it, and take a sip. An important part with champagne is when you take a sip, hold it in your mouth, let the bubbles dissipate a little bit so that you can actually taste some of the flavor of the wine. Don't just knock it back, you won't appreciate it near as much. So we're going to talk about champagne versus sparkling, and since we have a bottle open, and there is a lot of you, we're going to start passing this one around. You've got two glasses in front of you, so remember it is not a race. You don't have to slam them back. Take your time with it. Work your way through. It's going to be okay. So, champagne versus sparkling wine. While champagne sparkles, not all sparkling wine is champagne. What? So 90 miles northeast of Paris, covering 85,000 acres, the Champagne region produces high-quality sparkling wines. The designation is not technically an indication of quality, though it kind of is, but of the region it came from. Champagne is made from Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. Sometimes they'll slip a couple other things in there, but generally those are the only grapes they use. Other sparkling wines may use these grapes or several other varieties from regions around the world. Sparkling wine is typically made in one of three methods, and we'll talk about it. The traditional method, method traditionnelle, the Charmat method, or a tank, and the carbonation or soda method. We try to avoid the soda method as much as possible. Anytime you see bubbly, they soda methoded that, which means they just took their still wine and pumped some bubbles into it. I do not recommend it. You deserve to not have to deal with bare feet or yellow tails or, unfortunately, St. Clair's. Sorry. That's what it is. So, we've got a bunch of different kinds of sparkling. So you've got your Sekt, that's the German sparkling, your Cava, Spanish sparkling wine. We've got our Prosecco, Italian sparkling wine, Crémant, the French sparkling wine made outside the Champagne region. Champagne, the good stuff, made within Champagne, France. The Blanc de Blancs, French champagne made from 100% Chardonnay, that white of white. We've got Blanc de Noir, made from all red grapes, typically the Pinot Noir grapes. And then Rosé, French champagne made by utilizing the red grape skins or mixing in red wine. So here is how to open a bottle of bubbly. Alyssa, do we need to open another one?
Probably.
All right. Glad I grabbed spares. So. Oh, exciting. Okay. So of course you always take the foil off first. I know that seems like a no-brainer, but I have to mention it. You get your thumb on that, hold it hard, bring down the cage, turn it 6 times, and 1 and 2, oh, it's already moving, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whoop. You can either remove the cage or hang on to the cage, depending on how daring you're feeling at the time. You point it away from everyone you love towards your enemies, and you hold the cork, turn the bottle. And you allow the pressure in the bottle to lift the cork on its own. And you're good to go. I tell this story all the time, but only because it was such a moment. I'm sure all of you have heard of Cristal as a bottle of bubbly that people really like to spend money on. And there was a gentleman who was buying a case of Cristal, 6 bottles worth. It had a comma in the price tag. And I was talking to him about, is this for a party? Do you want something different? What's the plan? And he was like, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. I'm only going to drink like half the bottle anyway, since most of it will end up on the floor. I was like, you what? He was like, yeah, that's what happens when you open bottles. And I was like, oh, buddy, no. No, don't do it. So I had to teach him how to properly open a bottle of champagne, which is like you just saw. And then you take your cork and made a turtle out of it. So, I included this because I love it as a quote. One holds a bottle of red wine by the neck, a woman by the waist, and a bottle of champagne by the derriere. Thank you, Mark Twain. He knew what he was talking about. Now here's another way to open a bottle of bubbles.
We're here today with Armando Pizzuti from the Royal Plantation in Ocho Rios, Jamaica, where it is nice and warm as opposed to about, 30 degrees here.
It's about 86 degrees today.
Oh, let's go. Anyway, lots of luxury resorts in the Caribbean have sailing and spa and golf, but only the Royal Plantation has a Sabrage master. Armando is here to tell us today about the history of Sabrage and how it works. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, the heart of Sabrage goes back to Napoleon time. Madame Clicquot actually used to entertain some of the soldiers, and when they departed her castle, Madame Clicquot used to give a bottle of champagne. As the soldier rode off on horseback, they opened the champagne with their sword. And then it became an art, and the heart of Sabrage actually is passed from master to down. There's not such a school that you can learn. It's passed from master to apprentice.
So, tell us about the sword. Is
The
this
sword.
a special sword?
Well, this actually the sword, it's a replica of Napoleon Bonaparte's sword. It's an actual replica. It's a short sword, and the sword, for the art of Sabrage, the sword should not be sharp. Okay, matter of fact, if you see it, the sword is not sharp.
Oh, it's quite dull.
Yeah, it's very dull. You don't need sharpness to savor a bottle of champagne.
Okay. So how does Sabrage work? Is there a specific type of bottle you need to use?
Every bottle has a weak point, and the weak point actually is in the seam of the bottle.
Oh, warning before we do anything. Do not do this at home.
Yeah, please don't. So you ready?
We're ready. Oh my gosh, we are ready.
Let's go.
I will duck behind you to a safe spot.
No, that's okay. Don't. I can show that eventually too. You ready?
Ready. Wow, that's just broken right off. So how do you know no glass got inside?
The pressure of the actual champagne will just take everything out.
You can demonstrate that on the next one.
With a glass of champagne.
Well, thank you so very much.
Cheers.
Cheers. So I guess the question is, does champagne taste better if it's been opened with a sword?
Absolutely.
You want to switch back?
Ready?
Or are you going to stay on that side?
I'll take this.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Alyssa was just asking me, I left my sword in my other vest. You'll have to try it at home and tell me how it goes. So I'm sure you've all drank all your stuff, but I haven't yet, so cheers to all of you guys. I'm glad you're here. We've made it. Very pleasant. Hints of lemon. It's nice. Yes! Oh, I got ahead of it. Excuse me. We are having a cava. I'll get to the slide in a second. So cavas, the signature sparkling wine of Spain, is named for its method of production, not like champagne for its origin. So cava is Spanish for cave or cellar, where it actually is kept and aged and kind of comes from. So there's 159 villages spread over 8 different wine regions across Spain are authorized for production. Catalonia being the most popular with 95% and 18 million cases produced per year. That's quite a few. So it's made in the same manner as champagne, method traditional, which we will talk about. So most cava is dry in style. Yeah, you got it. No spill. Love it. Good job. So typically they use Macebeo, ripe exotic citrus and stone fruit, base for most blends. I can definitely taste that in that one. The Periada, flour with nutty notes, adds some mid-palate texture. And the Zorillo is underripe, demure, citrus, and apple, that tart, acidic flavor. So they've also got their classifications in their cavas. So the standard cava is a minimum of 9 months aging in bottle, same as French Cremant. The Reserve, minimum of 15 months aging in bottle, same requirements as non-vintage champagne. And the Grand Reserve, a minimum of 30 months aging in bottle, vintage dated, and available as Brutature, Extra Brut, or Brut only, similar to vintage champagne. Here's the one that you all chugged so fast and loved. The Rondo Gold Brut Cava. You can go ahead and start passing it around while we're staring at this one. So the one you had is a blend of 4 different grapes from Spain. It's all the major ones, plus some Chardonnay. I could see that with grilled swordfish. Why not? That'd be a fun afternoon. Or morning, you know. Grating the Cheerios. So what did you think of that one? It's pretty nice, right? Yeah. It's inexpensive, but it's flavorful. It does really everything you need it to at that price point. It's light. It makes, generally too, cavas are kind of perfect for mimosas also, because they already have that touch of minerality to them, which leans right into the minerality of the orange juice. So generally perfect. If you ever need to make a whole bunch of mimosas, grab some cavas. And so she's passing around the next one, just to get it in front of you. But while she's doing that, let's talk about how these bubbles are made. So first, you will harvest your grapes, as you do with all wines. You'll start your first fermentation, make an actual wine all the way through. Then you get to your assemblage. You're blending up to 40 still wines. This is known as the cuvée. So this is them designing what their flavor is actually going to be for that champagne or sparkling. Then once you've got your blend put together, you hit your liqueur de triage. You're adding your sugar and your yeast, which kicks in the second fermentation. That's where all the bubbles come from. And then we split off of how it gets made. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the soda method, because you already understand it. So our method traditional, how the really good stuff is made, is done in the bottle. So they get to their rumage or riddling. That is, as soon as the secondary fermentation is completed, which can take anywhere from 10 days to 3 months to actually finish, they will slowly move the dead yeast down to the neck of the bottle to get it all together. They don't want to disturb the wine too much, so they do it slowly, a bit at a time. Then they get to their disgorgement, where they freeze the yeast into a thick plug. They will take the bottle, turn it upside down, and stick it into a liquid nitrogen bath to freeze that plug up so they can pull that out as one big thing. And then they hit their dosage, which is just topping off with varied amounts of sugar and still wine so that you don't have that big empty space in your bottle. So it goes back to putting in what they put in originally to fill it back up. And then you cork that bottle. You're ready to go. Versus the Charmat method, which happens in a tank. So rather than slowly moving their yeast out, since they can't, it's all in a giant tank, they filter out the sediment and yeast from the tank. They'll put it through a big filtration process to remove all of the dead yeast. Then they'll top it back off and fill and cork the bottle. And then they've got it. So that's the difference of doing it all in one space or in a very large space. We'll talk a little bit about the difference those can make. Melissa, you need another one?
Yes.
Yeah. I know, got so many thirsty people in here.
If I get the other.
Ah, okay.
That would have been a little.
We're ready. Oh, and I guess while we're opening stuff, we should talk a little bit about that. That the standard of popping that bottle and exploding all over the place is really fun. But the way the French describe it, of what you're trying to get once you open it, is the sigh of an angel once it opens.
The side
The sigh of an angel. Ah. So, this is a little bit what that looks like. The autolysis aging on the lees itself. So after that secondary fermentation, the yeast cells, or the lees, so anytime you see lees, it mostly comes up in white wines. They're talking about the yeast, begins to break down, releasing compounds like proteins and glucons that react to the flavor compounds in the wine. So this produces that tasty, nutty, pastry-like aroma of the champagne. So when you've had some sparkling wine that has that real bready, biscuit sort of flavor, that's from the yeast that was in there. So the minimum aging is 15 months for non-vintage and 3 years for vintage in champagne. So the high-end and prestige champagne houses will often age their wines for several years to give it as full of flavor as possible. So this step is also why producers of Prosecco and Moscato use the tank method. There is some method to the madness. The Glera and Moscato grapes are prized for their fresh fruit flavors, and this process breaks down the yeast and can lessen that vibrant, fruity flavor. Using a large tank rather than a small bottle gives more surface area to minimize the impact of the yeast. So with those kind of wines, you want all of that fruit and character and flavor, so you want to give it as little yeast as possible, because that will break down a lot of that fruit. So riddling, this is the other one we were talking about. So in 1818, Antoine Mueller of Veuve Clicquot developed the technique of riddling to remove sediment, mostly the dead yeast cells, without losing so much wine and bubbles. So the process moves the sediment to the neck. Bottles in the rack, 120 bottles, are turned and slightly shaken every second or third day, with the whole process taking 2 to 3 months. Can you imagine that as a job? Just coming up to your rack and for hours?
Yeah.
You don't want to do it too much. You mess up the whole thing, because it's just a little, the whole time. So professionals can twist 60 to 70 bottles a minute, rotating between 40,000 to 50,000 bottles a day. It's a long day. But mechanized gyro pallets holding 405 bottles were developed in Spain for cava production and can complete the process in 1 week, which is a big reason the cost of cava is so much less than champagne. They just mechanized it. And in champagne, they're like, no, let's make the people do it. So Prosecco, that thing we're drinking, or that you already drank. So it's Italy's most popular sparkling wine, originating in the Veneto region, named after the small village Prosecco, where the wine was first made. So it's called Prosecco, because that's where it comes from, but it's made from Glera grapes. So Prosecco is produced in 5 different wine regions across Italy. The most acclaimed Proseccos come from Prosecco di Caglione Valdobbiadene, mostly produced using the Charmat or tank method. Generally, off dry. They must be made with at least 85% Glera grapes. So, and those are the locations there. The most common quality Prosecco, Prosecco DOC, and then the DOCG, which we have some of, and our other ones here. This is what we were tasting. What do you think of that one?
Yeah.
Now that's a reaction. Yeah!
So with Prosecco, what have you considered, I mean, if you were gonna do a comparing, is it considered a sec or an extra dry, I mean, on the sugar level?
Mm-hmm.
What's the sugar level?
So,
And Cava also.
what was the second question? Part of the question?
Cava, what kind of sugar level, and the same with Prosecco?
So,
Do we know?
let me get to my chart, which is a little bit further down,
Okay.
and we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Great question.
It's an also the time one.
Yes, and those ones are very high on the sugar level,
Yeah.
on purpose. When they reach the disgorgement where they're adding more of the wine and sugar back in, on those they add a lot more sugar back. Because the yeast has already done their business and they're like, dump some more sugar. A note on Proseccos while we're still here, they changed the law 2 years ago where they used to have Prosecco rosés but couldn't call it a Prosecco rosé on the label. They changed it finally to where you can have a legitimate official Prosecco rosé, and what that's required is that you have to have at least 10% of your blend has to be Pinot Noir, specifically, to make it that red. And at the time, wildly different, seeing what was like, oh, it's a rosé versus an official rosé. They tasted so much different. And the new ones are worlds better because they're properly using Pinot Noir. It's this bigger, fuller flavor. It has more fruit character. So if you ever need a Prosecco rosé, know that it's got a bit of Pinot Noir in it, which is fantastic, really. Hey, serving sparkling. Where are we at? All right. Good, I already opened that one. So, these are the proper ways to serve your champagne. We got plenty of flutes for you, but you can always change it up when you get home or you're having your dinner parties. So the ideal temperature for sparkling wine is 43 to 50 degrees, which is about 3 hours in the refrigerator or 30 minutes on ice, roughly. So nicer bottles can be served in the warmer side to showcase the aromas and flavors. Lesser bottles can be served on the colder side as they don't have as much developed characteristics on display. So that's where your bubblies are. Get them colder. It's okay. So the standard 750 bottle will fill approximately 6 glasses of wine. When you're actually pouring it, we're definitely going light tonight. There's a lot of you. So here's your glassware. So you've got your flute, the typical glass. Spectacular for bubble watching, less for appreciating the aromas. Harder to get your nose really in there. The coupe glass, although very pretty, the bowl is too shallow to contain the effervescence or aromas. It just erupts out. But then you've got your tulip. It's perfect for retaining the bubbles and showcasing the aromas. It delivers a little bit rounder but direct to you so you can appreciate all of the layers that the sparkling has. So fill glass about 3/4 full. Either pour in upright glass slowly to not overflow, because as soon as you've got it upright, it will react. Or at a 45-degree angle to preserve a higher amount of the bubbles. The softer pour from the side to allow it to retain more of the bubbles. So sip your sparkles slowly, like we talked about, to taste the wine, but also dissipate the bubbles before swallowing. And this was an important one, I thought. This allows you to taste more and also keep the bubbles from helping the alcohol enter your bloodstream faster, which can cause headaches. So most times when people are like, I don't like bubbles, it always gives me a headache. That might be part of why. Stop chugging all the bubbles. It will go straight to your head. Champagne should take your time with it, enjoy it. So, what is wrong? So Cremant is the name of the French sparkling wines made outside the Champagne region. It is not Champagne if it's not made in Champagne. Cremant is as close to Champagne as you can get without being Champagne. So there are 8 different French wine regions producing Cremant. The best regions are Burgundy and Alsace. It's made in the same manner as Champagne, Méthode Traditionnelle, but may use a wider range of grapes. Because they're not beholden to those main 3, they can change it up and chase flavors rather than anything else. So they style from demi-sec, sweet, to brut, very dry. So we've got our Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Blanc as the main ones. Here's our regions here. Cremant de Bourgogne, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, blended typically with Gamay, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, and Aligoté. Your rosé is Pinot Noir. Cremant d'Alsace, Pinot Blanc, a whole host of things, Loire, Chenin Blanc, Cab Franc, Pinot Noir. And here's the one she's passing around. So this one, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Aligoté, and Gamay. Gamay being Prosecco grape, which has a little bit more of that fruit character to it. So what do you think of that one, those of you who've gotten it? Interesting. What? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
I didn't think it was very bubbly.
Okay. And that actually is a great point. As you get further up in the production quality of champagne, they tend to have, and the way I describe it generally is that sparkling wine has really explosive bubbles that burst in your tongue and in your head, whereas champagne has really small, refined bubbles that'll kind of dance along your tongue rather than burst. So it is a different texture, it's a different experience. And that I see people either loving or hating as well, is, oh no, there's too much bubble, and sometimes, oh, not enough bubble. So you have to kind of find your sweet spot in between. But I think the Louis Billot, that's about as close to actual champagne as you can get, especially for the price point, without buying actual champagne. Perfect way to say it. Of the house?
Well, just because they keep that kind of regulation, like I was in response to somewhere, it's really interesting how carefully controlled everything here. They get so much in everything they do. Very controlling.
Yes.
Very consistent.
Well, that's funny about the guys that will go right in the face of that. Make very interesting, like all the super Tuscans and everything else. They just hate all their
So is that, and so, but that's the COCG in France?
Yes, and I just forgot what it was.
It's fun, right? The idea of having like a consistent product. Right?
Yes, and they're very particular about the consistency. That's true. And that, for sparkling, is more about the aging than anything. That's their DOCs and DOCGs. It's the 9 months, 15 months, and 30 months of aging. I see a hand in back.
Yeah, so the Cremant is what is made in France, but not Champagne.
Correct. Correct.
Can it be made by the traditional method?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Typically, it is made with the traditional method, but because it's not made in Champagne, it isn't Champagne legally. But I can't speak for every house outside of Champagne, but typically they will do the traditional method. They'll do the proper riddling. They'll do it all in bottle. But doing it outside of Champagne also allows them to use different grapes for it, which is part of the draw. So these guys are using Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, 2 of the 3 main ones, but they're also using Aligoté and Gamay. So because they're doing it as a Cremant, they're allowed to do something different. But everything else in their production is essentially Champagne, other than the grapes, which is kind of important.
There was a lot more small bubbles. I felt a lot more time.
Yeah, and that's what I said. The closer you get into Champagne, the smaller, more refined the bubbles become, which is kind of exciting too.
When you buy a bottle, how do you know if it's a tradition method or the tank method?
Typically, you would know. So all champagnes are going to be Méthode Traditionnelle. actual champagne is always going to be method traditional. Has to be. Cremants typically will do method traditional.
There's nothing on the bottle.
Not specifically. What you'd have to know is where it's coming from, and then know how those areas typically do it. Anything Prosecco or Cava is going to be doing tank generally. Anything really in France is going to 9 times out of 10 be method traditional. And then again, if you ever see bubbly, you know that was just bubbles put in. But no, they don't typically like to admit it when they're doing something else. But certain places have to do it a certain way. So that's what you'd look for more than anything, is the where, which becomes the what. So do we kind of like this one? I like that this is the first one that there's a split. A little bit of, well, yes, no. That's exciting. I'm excited to see where this goes. Okay. So this one, important note too, aged 12 months on the lees. Do you get that sort of breadiness out of it? Oh yeah.
It's like bread.
And that is where that comes from, is how much time it was sitting on the yeast to get that biscuity flavor, which some people really like or kind of don't prefer. Hey, look, our sweetness scale. All right, we got that. Yeah, let's start passing this around. Again, it's not a rush. Take your time with it. There's just a lot of you, we got to start passing it out. So, our sweetness scale. So the Dew, which I think we have maybe 1 bottle of in the store, is 50 plus grams of sugar left in the bottle. It is absurdly sweet. Demi-sec is typically the one you'll look for when you're looking for sweet. So that is 33 to 50 grams of sugar per liter. It is sweet. Sec, you see sometimes that's a light sweetness, 17 to 35 grams of sugar per liter. Your extra dry, which is weird to be extra dry and still be on the sweeter side. It's 12 to 20 grams of sugar per liter. And then Brut, the one that you see most commonly, is very dry. But I generally disagree with that statement as Brut, because Bruts with less than 12 grams of sugar can be kind of sweet, and they can be kind of dry. I feel like Bruts balance what you're kind of looking for in your bubbles. And then extra Brut is the very, very dry, less than 6 grams of sugar per liter. So, how much sugar is sweet? So most dry red and white wines, such as Cabernet and Chardonnay, will have less than 5 grams per liter of residual sugar, okay? So many softer red blends will have 8 to 15 grams per sugar. So many off-dry Rieslings will have 10 to 20. Now this is important to know, and these are numbers that I pulled from a few years ago. They might have changed and gotten worse since, but at the time, Ménage à Trois California Red has 12 grams of sugar still in it. Apothic Red, 15. Chateau Ste. Michelle Riesling has 12 to 20, except for the Harvest Select, which is much sweeter. And Coca-Cola has 108 grams. So, you're looking 12 to 15 grams, you're pumping up into that sweeter edge. So when people go for the Ménage à Trois, the Apothic, the Ste. Michelle, and they feel like it's softer, it's lighter, it's the sugar. They left and put in a lot of sugar in those wines. So of course you like it more, of course it tastes like less thing, because there's so much sugar still in it. When you're looking at the standard Cab and Chard, 5 grams, maybe. So with 0 to 12 grams range in Brut, there can be a lot of variance in styles and sweetness. So many large and popular champagne houses will make Bruts on the sweeter side to cater to the American market, which tends to enjoy, air quotes, dry wines. We like it dry with its sugar. In other markets like the UK, there is a preference for true Brut styles that have less than 8 grams of residual sugar. So the reason most sweeter style Bruts don't necessarily jump out at people as sweet is because of the balance of acidity and the bubbles that add with the carbonic bubbles. So the bubbles balance out some of the sugar so it doesn't explode as, oh, that's sweet, because there's acids in the rest of the flavor. So when you're asking about the Cavas and the Proseccos and where they land in their sweetness, typically those ones edge towards, and it's not all the time because they don't publish it, but on average, those hang out within the brut to extra dry range. They allow a little extra sugar in there, which helps feed into the fruit and everything else that they want in theirs. And that's part of them doing the tank method and everything else is, and Gamay and Moscato grapes have a lot of sugar in them already. That's just what those grapes are. So they allow them to retain a bit of that, and when they're adding that still wine back in, that has a fair amount of sugar already as its base. So they bounce around right in here to let you have more of that sweetness. Moscatos, some of them can tend towards the higher end. I don't know if there's any officially that go for the sec area, but most likely yes. And that's part of why people like Moscatos so much. It's all the sugar. You don't like as much sugar.
I want more of this one. You are my friend.
It is a very good guy. I like them a lot. So, we've made it to Champagne, by the way. Yes, hand in the back.
Quick question.
Please.
The alcohol content,
Yes.
how much does that relate to the sweetness?
That's a great question. So typically the alcohol content doesn't really lean into the sweetness. You get more of the alcohol content when the yeast has eaten more of the sugar. So typically there's less sugar left to add more of the alcohol. But when they're adding their still wine in, and the old world style is typically to have more alcohol in it, but most champagnes hang out around 12 to 13%, so not very high. And that's something you see with most sparkling or sweet wines is the yeast has eaten that sugar, so there's not a lot left. We get asked all the time for, what's your sweetest, highest alcohol? And I want it fancy. It's a gift. I can get you not fancy and I can get you sweet. So it's a real balancing act. But the alcohol, it's the same kind of rules as anything else. The alcohol becomes a bigger palate for flavor. But with most bubbly, they hang out around 12. Unless you're getting the soda method, and then they're typically around 9. Because it's just a regular wine that they put bubbles in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, jeez. I gotta catch up. I'm sorry. No, thank you. So, hey, Champagne. So, Champagne's northern location and cool weather have traditionally created a challenging growing environment. As we see in just about every kind of wine, the harder it is to make the wine there, the harder the grapes have to work, the more flavor you get out of them. It's the old artist conundrum. If you have to work really hard, it'll probably be good at the end. So however, the chalky limestone soil is indeed ideal for growing grapes for sparkling wine. So most classification growths are within these three regions: Côte de Blanc, Vallée de Marne, and Montagne de Reims. So this was an important one, I thought. So again, they can only use these three. Chardonnay is 27% of all grapes planted. Pinot Noir is 36% of all grapes planted, and Pinot Meunier is 35% of all planted. If you did the math, you'd notice that there's 2% missing, and that is the other grapes that they grow there, that sometimes they'll use in blends that they typically will keep. They don't send a lot of champagnes that have other things in them, because there's so much rules around what they're allowed to use. So here's Champagne. Côte de Blanc, Vallée de Marne, Montagne de Reims. We've got a couple Montagne de Reims in here. Just wanted you to see where we're at. Many of you know Burgundy, Alsace, good old Bordeaux, but we're way up there in Champagne.
Where's England in there?
We don't worry about them. They're drinking champagne. They get to do whatever they want to do. It's sparkling. It's worthless. So this is important anytime you're checking bottles where you're at. Did we already pour the next thing?
The Sarine?
The Sarine.
Yes.
I did Sarine.
Okay.
We're ready for a second shot of
Well, okay. So,
I like you in the front.
do any of you still have any Sarine in front of you?
that. Sorry, it just drew me to it.
I get it. It's a gorgeous bottle. So we're going to start pouring the Piper Heidsieck. I want you to, in your head, compare the two. The Sarine and the Piper. So I hope you remember a little bit of what the Sarine tasted like. So champagne or lowercase champagne. So proper capitalization of wine grapes includes that when the second part of the name is a color descriptor, i.e. noir, gris, blanc, that it shouldn't be capitalized while it's a proper noun, like Meunier, that it should be capitalized. So it's colors versus actual grapes. So since champagne, the wine, is a protected name, it is also properly capitalized, while when people use champagne, colloquially and generally as a term for sparkling wine, i.e. Cook's champagne, that is a lowercase since it is not referring to true champagne from the Champagne region. So capitalization makes a difference. How real is this sparkling? So here was the one that we had, sorry. So this one was aged 24 to 36 months as they blend a little bit to get the flavors they want. So this one has 8 grams of residual sugar still in it. So that keeps it on kind of the mid to lower range of brut. Yeah. Yeah. So that one was founded in 1730. It was the 3rd oldest champagne house in all of Champagne. The first was in like 1537, so they beat them by a few hundred years. But these guys have been around forever. I have a sweet spot for them personally because when I started working here 5 years ago, that was the first real champagne that I got to try, and it opened my world to what a proper champagne can be. Also, the bottle is just really cool looking, which helps. They got really popular in Russia, and a lot of the upper class started buying all of their stuff. So they became Sarine. They're still proper French champagne, but they have spent a lot of time going to the royalty of Russia, which is why, humorously, the holiday package they have is a nesting doll with a bottle inside.
Oh, that's cool.
No extra charge. They just put it in a nesting doll, so you can slap a bow on that and give it for Christmas. So that is the Sarine. It's pretty good, right?
Oh, yeah.
And for you who already chugged it, you remember it fondly.
I do.
So now, the one that she's passing around now is the Piper Heidsieck. So they were aged for 24 months, roughly as long. Same dosage, the same residual sugar, and it was blended from more than 100 crus that they own and control. 50% of which is Grand Crus, which I'm pretty sure I have. I have a slide in for that. So for those of you who've gotten it already, what do you think of that one?
It's a little more new. That one's really
It is. It's good. It's fantastic.
It's good though. I prefer it now.
Yeah. Now, do you think that the Sarine has a little bit more toast to it than this? Okay.
I'm not going to give you the end of the bottle. Give me 1 second. You do see the green one. I think it's good.
I put it in. Yeah. No. I put it in. It's very light. I do.
Oh, no. Really?
And I'll tell you why when we get there.
I love this.
I'll tell you why when we get there.
Okay. You like
the trash.
Great marketing. Fine product.
I don't think the Condom is better than the regular.
Yes. I agree. For the price?
No. I don't.
Start right from the top. Top 100 wines of 2019. I think some hard cheeses, definitely. Some brown sugared glazed ham, absolutely. And champagne is great for the holidays, definitely, for a lot of reasons. But also it's really good with a lot of holiday time meals too. You don't always think about having some champagne with the turkey or the ham or anything else, but it works really well. Did you like that one? Oh,
I would think so.
It was like, they're like, oh, this is gonna work out. This is gonna be okay. It's so smooth, right? It's just rich. So, we'll take a quick poll. Whose favorite is the Saurian between the two? Okay. And the Piper? Okay. Edging a little towards Piper. Okay, that's fair.
Which she said it was her favorite.
You didn't answer.
You're right, I did. I already said that I have a real sweet spot for the Saurian. I think that it's very well balanced. It has very fine bubbles. It's very smooth. And I appreciate that they've been around forever.
Can we just say both?
I mean, both is really the right answer. What do you like? All of it, you know? They're all good.
The champagne.
So, oh, I love talking about some of this. Okay. Excited. You've been doing great opening them, too.
Yeah, that one might be.
That's fair. So, I only drink champagne on 2 occasions. When I'm in love and when I'm not. Said Coco Chanel, world famous fashion designer. There's no such thing as too much champagne. You're right. Though your head will try to tell you otherwise tomorrow. Leigh Bardugo, American author. I thought this was a good one too. Always carry champagne. In victory you deserve it, and in defeat you need it. Napoleon Bonaparte, a pretty famous general. Yes, and he's got the sword. He's ready to go and start drinking. Absolutely. There comes a time in every woman's life when the only thing that helps is a glass of champagne.
Yes.
Said Betty Davis, a national treasure.
She is.
This is an amazing class. Gonna have to rate it 10 out of 10 when I get home. Thanks, Sean. Oh, that's for you guys? Oh. You guys are so sweet. How'd you get up here? You're so good. Thank you. So from dinner with friends to a child's laughter or a lover's embrace, every day has moments worth the warmth of reflection and worthy of toast. Life is worth celebrating, and that's why champagne matters. David Whyte, author of But First Champagne. And I think, and that is something I really kind of like to dwell on, especially in these wild times, is that there's always a reason to celebrate. There's always something worth opening a bottle of champagne for. You got a promotion. You got a call from family you haven't talked to in a while. You didn't get run over on the way out the door. You made it through the day. It is worth opening a bottle of champagne for. There is always a reason to celebrate, and I feel like we definitely need to these days. So have some champagne on hand, because in victory you deserve it, and in defeat you need it. And now you'll have a few to keep in mind for all of your moments in the day. So champagne types. These are things to keep an eye on when you're looking at the bottles. Blanc de Blanc, white of white, 100% Chardonnay. So it's usually lighter and more delicate and crisp. Blanc de Noir, white of blacks, made from all red grapes, typically Pinot Noir. Not as common as Blanc de Blanc, but we have plenty of them. And the Louis Biot do a great Blanc de Noir. And your rosés, produced by macerating the juice with the red grape skins or by adding a bit of red still wine to the mix. They can have that fuller bodied and the fruited flavor. So these are the grapes of Champagne, worth keeping in mind. The Chardonnay adds that acidity, that freshness, that longevity and elegance, that lemon and mineral flavors, that creamy nuttiness. Pinot Noir adds that body and that structure and that complexity, that ripe tree fruit, spice, and autumnal flavors. And then Pinot Meunier. You don't see it near as much. It shows up in a lot of blends. Adds that fruity floral note. Fresh fruit flavors similar to Pinot Noir, more precocious in youth. It has a real green apple tartness to it. So when you have a champagne and it really hits with that tart acidity, that's the Meunier, making itself known. So rosé champagnes. Rosé champagne is the name of French rosé sparkling. It comes from an array of pink colors, the two methods we talked about. So the Saignée method allows some of the base wine to sit in contact with the skins until the desired color occurs. And the Rosé d'Assemblage is adding still red wine into each bottle before the second fermentation starts. So typically more fruit flavors than the white champagne counterpart, from delicate strawberry to rich cranberry. So here's the one getting passed around right now. Montadon Grand Rosé Brut, Paris's #1 champagne. They love Montadon in Paris. Actress and French resistance agent Josephine Baker made this her official champagne. I love that she loved that. Yes. It's crazy to read about her. Like, super spy, dancer, American-born, lived in France, like, fought for the French underground, like, just the coolest lady, and showed up in movies, and she loved champagne.
She could sing this.
Oh, absolutely. So this was her champagne. Not necessarily the rosé, but Montadon in general. She made that her official champagne. So this one in particular is 35% Pinot Noir, 30% Chardonnay, and 20% Pinot Meunier, with 15% of still Noir added to create that color, that flavor. What do you think of that one? There you go, 10 out of 10.
I know, I'm sorry.
What's the sugar content?
This one, they wouldn't tell me. I was looking all over. But I think based on that little bit of Pinot Noir that went back in, and it's still a brut, which means it's less than 12. But this one specifically, I think is probably around 8 or 9. It could be as high as 10 because of the just still Noir, but they don't have an official statement as to what it was. You made it. Only took a bottle and a half. Oh, that color.
Got a lot of these reactions.
Oh. I love the color on this one. It's gorgeous.
My issue is back years ago, the pink color makes me think of, who remembers Lancers? I know.
And I love, by the laughter, how many people you know that. Lancers, oh no. And that's fair. And that's kind of a common misconception with just rosés in general too, is that most people think of like it's either super fruity or super sweet or really low quality. And yeah, and that's not what rosé is. I mean, Rosé is just taking that lighter wine and adding a little bit more body and a lot more of that fruit and having a good time with it. And again, you want to avoid those bare feet and yellow tails. You can do better. And I think these guys nail it.
There's a lot of wine marketers who
Make bad wine.
well, and they also told Con Americans that's what they want. They gave
Yeah, and I talk to somebody at least once a week that will come in and be stunned. They're like, I've only ever gone to Walgreens and seen 3 bays of stuff, and it's like, but look at all this wonderland of drinks that we have here. You don't have to drink bad wine anymore. There is good stuff. Yes. Right? That's how, and so I didn't want to say, but I changed a lot of stuff in this presentation, and I didn't change that. Like, corporate sent it to me, and they're like, yeah, drunken noodles. And I'm like, okay.
What is it?
I think drunken noodles is you coming home drunk and wanting noodles. That's how I read it. They
like ramen.
yeah, it's just you want some ramen. And you don't, so, which to me, like the image of that, of coming home, you're stumbling, you just want some noodles, and you're like, you know what I also need? Some great champagne. I've got my stovetop running, time to get the good stuff out with it. Like, amazing. Drunken noodles. Yeah. Or fresh red berry dessert. You can see that, yeah. The red fruit and everything, of course, awesome. And drunken noodles. All right. This is dinner, and that's after dinner. Okay. So negociants, growers, and cooperatives. This is something you can find on the bottles. So the vineyard owners in Champagne vastly outnumber the number of houses. There are 16,000 vineyard owners and only 300 houses. So that is how many people own the farms, own the grapes, and don't want to bother having to make champagne. So they will sell the grapes and everything to some of the 300 houses to make it into champagne. So negociants buy grapes or sometimes even already made wine from other growers. You will see that in M on there. Grower champagne refers to producers who own the vineyards and produce champagne only for their estate-grown grapes. So they are the ones who grow it, they're the ones who make it. It all comes from them. That's your RMs. And then the cooperatives are made up of several small growers who usually don't grow enough on their own to have a champagne house, and will pool their resources together to create a single brand. So it's a bunch of smaller guys working together to make one thing as a cooperative. So you can find on bottles that NM, RM, and CM. So that CM's the small groups, the RM is all estate grown, and the NM is just negociants buying grapes and sometimes already made wines. I don't want to say it's a mark of quality, but it is something to know. So bubbly fun facts. Champagne as we know it was created by accident because the Champagne region is the most northerly winemaking region in France. Sometimes the cold winter weather would interrupt the fermentation process. When spring came, the yeast would start fermenting again, creating a secondary fermentation and natural carbonation, which for a long time the winemakers tried to prevent. This is how champagne came into being. It got too cold, the yeast calmed down, it warmed back up, the yeast kicked in, and bubbles happened. There are about 90 pounds per square inch of pressure in a bottle of champagne, more than triple the pressure in an automobile tire. These are weapons, which is why you only point them away from people or at people who really deserve it. So a champagne cork can reach a velocity of about 40 miles per hour if popped carelessly out of the bottle. So you're more likely to be killed by a flying champagne cork than killed by a poisonous spider. I don't know who did the math, but that had to have been a rough week. So allegedly, actress Marilyn Monroe took the term bubble bath to a whole new level when she took a bath in 350 bottles of champagne, which sounds like an amazing afternoon. At best, I'd have to just dip my feet in one of these to even, what I can afford. So there are approximately 49 million bubbles in a standard-sized bottle of champagne. Again, I don't know who did the math, but that's an amazing thing to know. Right? 1, 2. So these are just some fun anecdotes you can mention at parties. Did you know there's 49 million bubbles in that bottle? Go ahead, count. So what is Grand Cru champagne? We're building up. We're getting to the big stuff. So there are more than 300 champagne villages, those crus, varying reputations for quality and characteristics of the grapes they produce. So each village itself has a rating from 80 to 100%. So Grand Cru is 100% grade. So only 17 Grand Cru vineyards exist in Champagne. Premier Cru, 90 to 99% grade, only 38 Premier Cru vineyards, and then Dumé Cru, it's kind of some of the rest. So champagne houses use the average rating of the grapes used in their blends to establish quality. So we hit Mailly, Grand Cru. It's the only house in Champagne with 100% Grand Cru in every single bottle they send out. So everything from Mailly is top-notch stuff. They use the highest quality grapes you can use. And their dosage, 8. So again, we're still bouncing around that same 8 residual sugar. So this one in particular is 75% Pinot Noir and 25% Chardonnay. So that Pinot Noir is that fuller, richer body, that little bit more fruit character, and that 25% Chardonnay, a little bit lighter, a little bit more of that kind of apple pear flavor. Yeah.
Very, very firm. It's a very definitive flavor.
It's strong.
Yeah, it is strong.
So really, anytime you need to find a good champagne and you don't have to worry about whether or not it is, Mailly has the papers to back it. 100% Grand Cru grapes in everything they do. They make awesome champagne. We just keep getting better. We're moving up. It's true. I love Mailly. They're so good. It's bright, it's luscious, it has those hints of red fruit at the end. It's just a good champagne. Yeah. See, and I can still taste it, and I get that hint of toastiness to it and everything. It's just a full, solid champagne. So again, anytime you're looking for a good champagne, look for Grand Cru. Grand Cru is the mark of highest quality. That is, from whoever is working on it, Grand Cru is the mark of whoever's buying those grapes or utilizing those grapes will see those grapes and go, oh, I will pay top dollar for those because they are the best grapes we can use. Premier Cru is stepped down. They're good. They'll match 90 to 99% of that asking price, and that's where Premier Cru comes in. So, to your question about Veuve, Veuve is Premier Cru. They're actively using all right grapes. They're not bad grapes. They're not exceptional grapes, but they're okay grapes. And I have countless champagnes over there that cost less than Veuve that are Grand Cru grapes. They're utilizing the best stuff you can use. But you don't hear about them on the radio or commercials or see them in movies because that's what you're paying for with booze.
Well, you have to know how to make it too.
Yeah.
Not just the grapes.
You're right. But if I'm getting something that I already know is using an okay base, and I can spend less money to get something that is markedly, provedly a better base, that's what I'm going to buy.
Well, it's Carrie Bradshaw. Well, it's true. I mean, it's like,
So, and I've got one sitting next to it, DeMargerie, that's like $8 less that uses Grand Cru grapes. And they leave it on the lees about as long. It still has that toasty breadiness to it that people like out of food. But they're using okay grapes, and you can get better stuff. And that's kind of the biggest thing anytime you're looking at champagne is like, am I buying the brand name because I want to walk in and show how fat my wallet is? Or do I want to walk in with something that everyone's going to remember after they taste it? And that's what it becomes. Oh, hey, some history.
monks, they're always around alcohol.
They're everywhere. So this last one, she's going to start pouring it. Don't drink it yet.
Oh boy.
I know I'm asking a lot.
Just pour a little more.
Hold it. Hold it back. Stare at it, sniff it, lick your lips, but wait just a moment, okay? Me too. Well, poor light. We have to open the second one. All right. For most of Champagne's history, only still wines were produced in Champagne. The Romans planted the first vineyards in Champagne during their conquest of the region in 57 BC. After the fall of the Roman Empire, vineyards flourished around monasteries where wine was used for sustenance and religious ceremonies. And I brought this up in the last class. Some of you will remember that anytime you're looking at the history of wine or spirits, it always starts as either medicine or a religious rite. And then enough people kept drinking it and enjoying the effects of it that we turned it into an industry. So while monks in the French priories were purposefully making their wine sparkling by the 1530s, the monks of Champagne, like Dom Perignon, viewed bubbles as a fault and a safety hazard due to exploding bottles in the cellars. Sparkling wine at the time was often called devil's wine. So we've all, together, collectively, been enjoying an afternoon or an evening of devil's wine. Because it was exploding in cellars. Bursting glass, hurting people because of that second fermentation. They hadn't figured out how to harness it yet. So when it finally became popular, it was a long process of refining. First to create thicker glass bottles so that there was less prone to exploding. Then to the addition of cages so the bottles would be able to survive the long voyages on ships to thirsty parts of the world. Here's a drawing of ye old Dom Perignon. So historical records show that none of his winemaking notes or letters include references to making sparkling wine. In 1713, inventory of the cellars of the Abbey of Hospillers showed that all the wines under his stead were mostly red, with none of them sparkling. However, there are several positive attributes that Dom Perignon contributed to viticulture and winemaking in Champagne. First was the focus on terroir and how grapes grown in one plot would taste different than grapes grown in other parts. That's why we get so particular about where were these grapes grown, where they come from, because the soil, the climate around that, all makes a huge difference. So finally, second, Dom Perignon was a big advocate of blending, both in grape varieties and of different terroirs to make the most interesting wines. He was chasing flavors more than anything else. So Dom Perignon introduced the idea of quickly pressing red wine grapes, like Pinot Noir, to make white wines. He did this when the fashion of the times was more for white wines, but by the time of his death, it started to swing back to red wines. Dom Perignon was more interested in warding off bubbles and strengthening in the bottles they were placed in than actually producing sparkling wine. He spent much time studying the reactivation of yeast in the spring months once the cold wore off and the secondary fermentation began. Perignon took on the wine production of his abbey because it was so poorly viewed around France for its wines. He managed to turn it around and then began putting his name on his wines, which sometimes doubled their price at market because people started seeing his name attached to those wines. This is one of the so they put his name rather than really putting the abbey, which everyone hated. Everyone thought the abbey made crap wine, and so he started putting his name on it, and people were like, oh, that's something different. I like this. This is one of the first times a wine marketer did the marketing based on who made it rather than simply where it came from. And so many of the myths about Dom Perignon likely got their start from his successor, Dom Broussard, who wrote an account about the man in 1821 stating that he had invented sparkling wine, as well as other exaggerated stories to generate interest and prestige in their abbey. Moet, Hennessy, Louis Vuitton, Goodyear, Ford now owns the abbey and the name. So, Dom Perignon, the guy, didn't really like champagne. He was annoyed by it. Yes. Oh, there's champagne. But because they built this myth around who he was and what he did, and he made good wines. I mean, all records point that he did a good job making good wine, but he was not this giant arbiter of the best champagne there is in the world. A large part of that is marketing. So some key champagne stats: there are 300 champagne houses, 15,800 growers, more than 268 million bottles produced per year. 80% of production is non-vintage champagne, with the Brut style being the most common. Top export markets is the United Kingdom, the average of 31 million bottles per year. The United States, 22 million bottles per year. And then Germany at 12 and Japan at 11. Ah, Marilyn Monroe, what are you doing here? Taking a bath, you wild woman, you. So vintage champagne, the thing in front of you, the thing you've been holding back, I'm so proud of you. Vintage champagne doesn't mean old, it means special. To qualify as a vintage champagne, it must be made from grapes harvested in the same vintage year. Most of them are blends, around 3 to 6 vintages, some as many as 20. It has to be aged at least 3 years in bottle compared to 15 months for non-vintage. By law, at least 15% of the vintage must be kept as reserve for non-vintage wines to be blended in for other things. And each champagne house decides for itself if a harvest is good enough to declare a vintage year. Some makers will go years to decades before they put a vintage on it. And of course, not every one of them is vintage specific. So, we made it to the Lanson Noble Cuvée Brut 2002. And so because of that, and because this is my last class of the year, I want to take a moment to cheers all of you for coming here and appreciating some champagne, some old, very fancy champagne. Chin chin, clink clink, thank you to all of you. So Lanson Noble Cuvée from 2002. It's one of the oldest houses. It is the official champagne of Wimbledon. Only 6 grams dosage. They also the official champagne of the British royal family. In the history of champagne, generally champagne goes to people with a lot of money or clout. So what do you think of that one? It's mellow, it's light, it's smooth, it's refined, it's rich. It's a good time. Great for children. Phenomenal. So, we've reached the end. No, I know. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been a wild year. We have another year coming up. Hopefully it's good. But as always, there's something worth celebrating in any given day, big or small. Have some champagne for it. You all deserve it for everything you do and have made it through. And I hope you have a fantastic night and week and month and rest of the year and next year and life. And I have a little bit of some of these left if you want another sample. Otherwise, all of them are available in the back. Please get some. And I'll talk to you soon.
Are you not coming back next year? It sounds like you're not coming back.
Yeah, is this your last class?
It's the last class of the year. Good man Martin is teaching the one tomorrow. I will be stuck through all of January and February and possibly March doing overnights as we reset the store and move everything around because we've realized you guys all have too much memorized and we just have to make things difficult for everyone and shuffle everything around. Yes, we're going to keep the milk in the back, but the cheese in the front. And so it is going to be a long several months of not being around when people are awake or alive. As we actively make the store different. So I will most likely not see any of you for the first few months of next year, but I am here just about every single day this year. So catch me during this time if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help. But otherwise, I will be a night owl for the first third of the year. So I may or may not still be able to put together the classes to hand off to somebody else to teach. Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.